The single click echoed in the pre-dawn silence of the laundry shed louder than any gunshot. It was a sound of finality, a digital severing of ties that blood and memory were supposed to have made unbreakable. Outside, the Oregon mist swirled around the Obsidian Ridge Lodge, clinging to the ancient pines like a shroud inside. Bathed in the sterile glow of a laptop screen, Eleanor Evans, felt nothing, not rage, not sorrow, not even the bitter satisfaction of revenge. I felt only the profound, unnerving calm of a fault line that has finally, after decades of pressure, shifted into place. They thought silence was weakness. They were about to learn it was merely the intake of breath before the storm. My fall from grace had begun with a question poisoned by politeness. Are you here for the service staff entrance? The concierge's voice, smooth and condescending, cut through the lodge's opulent lobby. A raw November wind had followed me through the towering Douglas fir doors, and I stood there, a woman of 72. In a practical wool coat, balancing a small worn suitcase and a still warm Marion berry cobbler, its aroma of cinnamon and butter a stark contrast to the room's cold antiseptic grandeur. No one smiled, no one offered to help, they just stared, their expressions ranging from mild curiosity to outright disdain. No, I said, my voice a steady low thing, even as my heart fluttered like a trapped bird. I am Eleanor Evans, the mother of the man who booked this entire lodge. The concierge, a young man with more hair gel than warmth, arched a perfect eyebrow. His gaze swept over me, cataloging my sensible shoes, my silver hair pinned in a simple twist, the faint lines of worry and laughter etched around my eyes. He saw a relic, not a matriarch. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. You're not on the guest roster. I gave a slow, deliberate nod, a performance of composure that cost me more than he could ever imagine. I saw her then across the lobby, leaning against a marble pillar. Aria, my granddaughter. Her face illuminated by her phone. She saw me, she heard every syllable of my dismissal, but she didn't move. Instead, she turned her head, a quick, furtive motion to her friend Chloe, and I saw the tremor of suppressed laughter shake her shoulders. To them, I was not family. I was an inconvenient anecdote, a funny story to be shared later. Moments later, Serafina, my daughter-in-law, swept in, a vision in cashmere loungewear and silk eye mask still perched on her flawless face. She was the architect of this life, polished, imperious, and utterly unwelcoming. She saw me and glided forward, her movements practiced and smooth. She took my hand, her manicured fingers cool and dry, a gesture not of affection but of management. Eleanor, darling, she cooed, her voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. We talked about this. We're aiming for a very clean, modern aesthetic for this Founders' Day. No need for rustic energy. Her eyes flicked to the cobbler in my hand as if it were a piece of road kill. I baked the Marion berry cobbler, the one Julian always said tasted like his childhood. Serafina's smile was a masterpiece of dismissal. That's sweet. Perhaps you can leave it in the staff kitchen. The younger generation finds these dense desserts a bit heavy. Dense like my heart, I thought. Heavy like the sacrifices I had laid at their feet. When I asked where I was to stay, she didn't miss a beat. Oh, we thought you'd be coziest with a support staff. There's a perfectly serviceable pull-out in the laundry cabin just behind the main building. The laundry cabin, not a suite, not a room, but a utility shed. We just figured it's only for the weekend, she added, her voice bright with false concern. Nah, you're just here for the main dinner, aren't you? Just for one meal. The phrase echoed the one my own son Julian had whispered to me moments later, when he found me standing there stripped of my dignity. He'd kissed my temple, a fleeting dismissive gesture. Mom, don't make a scene, please, don't ruin this like you ruined Dad's funeral. He hadn't waited for my reply. He'd simply walked away, leaving me with the ghost of his father Arthur and the fresh wound of his betrayal. I didn't argue, I didn't demand respect. I stood in the cathedral-like silence of the lodge's grand hall and realized I wasn't a guest, I was a ghost haunting the edges of a life. I had paid for the seating chart by the grand stone fireplace, confirmed it. The names were rendered in elegant swirling calligraphy. Julian, Serafina, Aria, Chloe. Mine was not among them. I found my place later, a small wobbly card table set behind a decorative screen next to the humming beverage station for the catering staff. I sat alone. No one offered me water, no one poured me wine. I watched them, my family arrayed around a massive oak table that overlooked the misty churning Pacific. They raised their glasses, their laughter echoing in the vaulted space. To family. Julian toasted, his voice thick with a self-satisfaction I no longer recognized. And to the new chapter we've built. Serafina's eyes met mine across the expanse, her gaze as cold and gray as the ocean outside, and certainly not to the ghosts of the past. She added, her smile a glittering triumphant slash. I was that ghost, forgotten, transparent, a wandering presence they were trying to exorcise. I ate the scraps someone had brought me on a side plate, a spoonful of cold glutinous risotto, a few shreds of dry, overcooked salmon, leftovers from the leftovers. It was then, as the lights dimmed for the speeches, that I knew my silence had an Expiration date and MC. One of Serafina's smarmy marketing friends took the microphone tonight. We celebrate legacy, he boomed. We celebrate those who built this family, those whose vision made Ether Vine hospitality a reality. They all spoke. Aria talked about her influencer collaborations. Serafina spoke of brand synergy and future expansion. Julian delivered a short polished speech about courage and renewal. My name was never mentioned. Then they rolled out the cake, a towering architectural marvel of dark chocolate and gold leaf. The frosted words read to the founders. Julian raised his glass again. We wouldn't be here without each other, he declared, his gaze sweeping the room, pointedly avoiding my corner. And we are unburdened by the baggage of the past. Baggage. Ghost checkbook. I had heard all the names they called me. When they thought I wasn't listening, I sipped my water and offered a small knowing smile. They were celebrating in a lodge I had secured. They were toasting a future underwritten by my assets, and I was only just beginning. For 35 years, I was Mrs. Vance, the history teacher at Northwood High. I taught generations of students how to analyze the past, how to see the patterns of power and rebellion, of loyalty and betrayal. I ran the debate club, graded papers until my eyes blurred, and made a home for my husband Arthur and my son Julian that was filled with the scent of old books and baking bread. We didn't have wealth, but we had substance, we had love. Then the cancer came for Arthur, a quiet, insidious thief. It took his strength, his future, and finally his life. I spent 2 years navigating the labyrinth of oncologists and insurance adjusters, selling my mother's jewelry to afford experimental treatments, holding his hand while he whispered his fears into the pre-dawn darkness. In the quiet of our living room on a Tuesday morning draped in rain, he made me promise take care of our boy Ellie. He'd whispered, his breath a fragile thing even when he's a man, even if he forgets to look back. I thought I was keeping that promise. Julian was already married to Serafina, living 3 hours away on the coast in a minimalist glass house that looked more like an art gallery than a home. I sold our family house, the one filled with Arthur's ghost, and bought a modest condo just 20 minutes from them. I believed proximity would breed connection. I brought them pies they never ate. I offered to babysit a granddaughter who was always too busy. Serafina would smile her blade thin smile and say, "We're good, Eleonora, really, but thank you." Then came Julian's dream, a restaurant. "It's what I've always wanted, Mom," he'd explained over coffee, his eyes shining with an ambition that was both his and hers, an upscale brunch concept. Ether Vine. Serafina has the branding genius, I have the vision, we just the banks aren't seeing it. His credit was a disaster, and Serafina, for all her polish, had no capital. But I had the life insurance payout from Arthur, I had the equity in my condo, I had the small inheritance my parents had left me. I had enough. I did what mothers do, what I thought my promise to Arthur demanded. I stepped in. I didn't just co-sign, I became the primary financial guarantor. My name, my impeccable credit, my entire life savings became the foundation upon which they built their empire. "I don't want ownership," I told them, a foolish, trusting declaration. "I just want to see you succeed." Julian hugged me so tightly I could feel the desperate relief in his bones. Serafina called me their guardian angel. The first wire transfer was for $150,000. Ether Vine was an instant success. Magazine articles were written. Young couple transforms Oregon's culinary coast. They were in every photograph, smiling, radiant, the perfect picture of self-made success. My name was never mentioned. At first I didn't mind. I told myself their success was my reward. But the erasure was gradual, then deliberate. I'd visit the restaurant and Serafina would greet me with a flicker of annoyance, as if I were a health inspector. "We weren't expecting you," she'd say, ushering me to a dark corner table. They stopped inviting me to planning meetings, claiming my presence complicated the team dynamic. When they formed the official LLC, Ether Vine Hospitality Group, my name was nowhere on the incorporating documents. "It's just cleaner this way legally," Serafina explained, cutting me off before I could protest. My name, the one that secured the multimillion-dollar line of credit, was suddenly too messy for a piece of paper. The worst part was the silence. The phone calls ceased unless a bill was due or a password was needed. Every text from Julian began with, "Hey Mom, quick question," or "Sorry to bother you," but there was no "How are you," just the clipped urgency of someone addressing an appliance. I watched them flourish from a distance, their vacations growing more exotic, their cars more expensive, their lives glossier. I was the invisible engine powering their beautiful machine, and I never said a word. I just kept my promise to Arthur, writing the checks, signing the documents, and reminding myself that love was patient. But even the most patient heart has a breaking point. It wasn't the big things that broke me, it was the cobbler. I woke at dawn on the morning of the Founders' Day celebration, a dull ache in my joints and a stubborn hope in my heart. I would bring something of myself, something of our history. I made my Marion berry cobbler from scratch, using the recipe my own grandmother had carried with her from the old country. It was more than a dessert, it was A testament, a story in a Pyrex dish, I carried it into the lodge's main kitchen like an offering. A young tattooed chef barely glanced at me. "Just leave any outside food on that prep table," he said, pointing with a knife. "I brought this for the family meal," I explained softly. "Yeah, sure," he muttered, already turning away. I placed it down gently. Later, as I sat at my sad little table, I overheard Arya talking to her friend Grandma and her dust bowl. "Desserts," she snickered, scrolling through her phone. She probably thinks marionberries are still a fruit, not just a flavor profile for a vape. My heart constricted, but I stayed quiet. I was here to be kind, I was here to be invisible, I was here to keep my promise. An hour later, I returned to the kitchen to see if the cobbler had been served. That's when I saw it. Another server, a young man with a beard, was holding my Pyrex dish. It had been scooped from once, maybe twice, then abandoned. He walked to the large industrial trash bin, and without a moment's hesitation he tilted the dish and scraped my offering, my history, my love, my grandmother's memory, into the garbage with the rest of the refuse. He looked up and saw me standing there frozen. "Oh, sorry," he said, startled. "Didn't know anyone still wanted this." He didn't wait for a reply. He just walked away. That was it, the final erasure. In that moment, the ghost of Eleanor Evance, the patient, loving, silent benefactor, finally faded away. In her place stood something colder, clearer, and infinitely more powerful. That night, in the musty chill of the laundry cabin, I opened my old laptop. The screen flickered to life, and I found the folder I was looking for there. It was the operating agreement for Ethervine Hospitality Group, and there in the fine print was the clause my lawyer, a shrewd woman who understood the treachery of families better than I did, had insisted upon. Clause 17B, revocation of sponsorship. It stated that the financial guarantor retained the absolute right to revoke all sponsorship and freeze all associated assets in the event of financial misconduct, brand misrepresentation, or documented evidence of emotional or psychological harm inflicted by any principal party of the corporation. I had thought it was just a formality. Now I saw it for what it was, a key. I had built their castle, and I had kept a key to the master lock. I clicked through my emails, my digital archives of their neglect. There was the email from Julian 3 years prior. "Mom, thank you for believing in us. Dad would be so proud. I promise you'll never regret this. You're our foundation." I looked at the attached PDF, my signature authorizing the transfer of my entire retirement fund. Foundation, a thing to be built upon, and then forgotten. My cursor hovered over a file I had saved weeks ago, a screenshot of a group text. Serafina had accidentally included me, and a vendor had forwarded it with a promotional flyer. "Serafina to Julian and Arya, we need to manage Mom at the founders event. I can't deal with her waterworks or weird traditional food again." Arya had replied with a laughing emoji. "She's just the ATM with a pulse." Julian hadn't replied, but his silence was its own form of assent. I attached the screenshot. I attached the saved voicemail from Julian asking for my name for credibility, not input. I attached the photograph I had taken on my phone just hours ago, my lonely place, setting a sticky note with Eleonora scrolled on it, sitting in the shadows next to a soda dispenser. I composed the email. My fingers didn't tremble, my breath was even. I felt no vengeance, only a profound sense of correction, of balancing a ledger that had been ignored for far too long. I saved it to my desktop in a new folder. I titled it, "When the Cobbler is Thrown Away." Then I shut the laptop, lay back on the lumpy cot, and listened to the distant sound of their laughter. They could toast their success, they could celebrate their brilliance, but they had forgotten one crucial historical lesson: foundations are everything, and I was about to remind them what happens when the foundation is removed. The next morning, I did not feel like a spurned mother. I felt like an auditor. While the family enjoyed a private yacht excursion, a Thanksgiving detox, Serafina had called it on her Instagram, I sat in the laundry cabin, the scent of bleach sharp and clean in the air. I opened my laptop and pulled up the draft. I addressed it to the head of commercial accounts at Sterling Point Financial. Subject: immediate revocation of financial endorsement, either Vine Hospitality Group. The body of the email was short, precise, and devoid of emotion. "To whom it may concern, this letter serves as formal notice to invoke Clause 17B of the Guarantor Agreement for Ether Vine Hospitality Group, project code AV734, effective immediately. I, Eleanor Evans, revoke all financial support, sponsorship, and endorsement. I withdraw all authorization for the use of my name, assets, or reputation as security or collateral for any and all lines of credit, lease agreements, and vendor accounts." The basis for this revocation is a pattern of emotional and psychological mistreatment, intentional misrepresentation of my foundational role in the corporation, and the exploitation of familiar ties for deceptive financial gain. Please find attached documentation for your review. Respectfully, Eleonora L. Tenvance. I attached the files, then I added one more, a short audio clip sent to me weeks ago by a young hostess who had quit disgusted. She'd recorded a snippet of a staff meeting. Serafina's voice was clear and cutting. Don't worry about her approval for the new loan, she's just the checkbook with wrinkles, she never says no. And then I hit send. The automated confirmation arrived in less than a minute. 20 minutes after that my phone rang, a crisp professional voice on the other end. Mrs. Vance, this is Amelia Travers from Sterling Point Financial. We are in receipt of your email and have reviewed the attached evidence based on the unambiguous terms of your guarantor agreement. We have initiated an immediate freeze on all financial activity tied to Ethervine Hospitality Group and its subsidiaries pending a full legal review. She paused, and I could hear the faint sound of typing. I must ask, ma'am, do you expect the principals to contest this? I looked out the small window at the gray, indifferent sky. I expect they will be furious, I said calmly, but they will not find a single lie in my evidence. A moment of respectful silence. Very well, Mrs. Vance, you have handled this with remarkable clarity. I didn't smile. But deep inside a quiet warmth began to spread through my veins. It wasn't joy, it was justice. Let them sail on their rented yacht. When they returned to shore they would discover the well had run dry. The fallout was not a storm, it was a contagion. It started with a TikTok video that went viral by Sunday afternoon. A waitress from Ethervine sitting on a curb outside the now dark restaurant. The caption read, "When you work a 16-hour holiday weekend and your paycheck bounces, cause the owner's mom finally snapped. Founders Day fiasco. Apparently grandma funded the whole empire," the young woman said to her phone, a bitter laugh escaping her lips, "and she got sick of being treated like an old piece of furniture, so now none of us get paid. Happy Thanksgiving." The comments exploded. My private pain was now public spectacle reduced to pixels and punchlines, but I felt no shame. I was no longer invisible. An hour later Julian called. His name flashed on my screen, angry and demanding. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Mom, what in the hell did you do?" he yelled, his voice raw with a panic I had never heard before. "You've destroyed everything. I revoked my sponsorship." "Julian," I said, my voice quiet, as was my right. "You're right. Do you have any idea what that means? Payroll has been frozen. Our suppliers are pulling their contracts. The expansion team is threatening to sue us." In the background, I could hear Serafina shrieking, the sound of something glass shattering against a wall. "You didn't just freeze an account, Mom, you killed the brand." "No, Julian," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I just stopped pretending I wasn't the one holding it all together." There was a beat of stunned silence. "This is about the dinner, isn't it? This is insane. You're punishing us because you didn't like your seat." "No," I replied softly, "I'm holding you accountable because you forgot that I wasn't just a guest at your table, I was the table." He muttered an oath, then hung up. I sat in my quiet condo, the tea in my hand long since gone cold, and watched the last of the autumn leaves surrender to the wind. The final confrontation was not in a home, but in a conference room. The air was sterile, smelling of fear and expensive coffee. My lawyer, Mrs. Davison, sat beside me, a bastion of quiet competence across the polished mahogany table. Julian and Serafina looked hollowed out, their designer clothes hanging on them like costumes. Two men in severe suits from the bank presided. Mrs. Vance, one of the bankers, began, "We are obligated to allow the other parties to respond before we finalize the revocation. This is a misunderstanding." Julian began, his voice strained. "Mom, allow me," I said, my voice cutting through his plea. I slid a file across the table. Inside were the printed emails, the transcribed voicemail, the photograph of my sticky note place card. "You wrote my name on a disposable note and hid me behind the kitchen," I said, my eyes locked on his, "so I took your names off the accounts that matter." Serafina gasped. "That's not fair. We're stressed. We were hosting." "You were cruel," I interrupted, my tone still even, "and you were dismissive. You referred to me as a checkbook with wrinkles. You threw away the food I made for you. Don't speak to me of fairness." I turned to her, my gaze unwavering. "You served me leftovers in the dark. I'm serving you consequences in the light." She shrank back in her chair, speechless. "Legally, Mr. Covington from the bank cleared his throat. Clause 17B is ironclad. Mrs. Vance is well within her rights, so that's it." Thomas finally burst out, slamming his pen on the table. "You just get to detonate our lives and walk away." I looked at my son, at the man he had become, and felt a pang of something ancient and sad. "I didn't detonate anything, Julian. I simply stopped holding up the walls while you were busy chipping away at the foundation." He had no reply. There was nothing left to say. I stood, and Miss by Davison gathered our things before we left. Serafina's voice, now small and trembling, stopped me at the door. "Please, Eleonora, it was a mistake. We never meant." I looked back at her, at the ruins of her ambition. "Oh, you meant it," I said softly. "You just never thought it would have a price." And then I walked out into the clean, cold air, not in anger, but in peace. The silence I had carried for so long had finally found its voice, and it was deafening. They never replaced the empty chair. It became a legend. A local journalist, a bright young woman named Isabel, wrote an article that went viral. The founder they tried to erase, how one mother took her empire back. She didn't paint me as a victim or a villain, she painted me as I was a woman with wrinkles in her skin and iron in her spine. My inbox flooded with messages from strangers, mostly women. They were stories of being seated at the kids' table long after their own children had grown of funding dreams, and being written out of the acknowledgments of being the silent, unpaid, uncredited CEO of their own families. They gave you cold food, but you gave us fire, one woman wrote. Another said you were the quiet in the room they underestimated, but when you moved the whole table shook. An invitation arrived on heavy cream-colored cardstock. It was to be the keynote speaker at the Women in Leadership Summit in Seattle. The proposed topic: when they forget your worth, remind them who signs the checks. I told my story to a room full of women who understood the weight of a thankless sacrifice. I spoke of the cobbler in the seating chart. I told them how my own son had diminished my presence to a single meal, and how that had been the last meal I ever allowed someone else to serve me. At the end, there wasn't thunderous applause, there was a slow rising tide of bodies, a silent standing ovation that was more powerful than any cheer. It was the sound of recognition. Ether Vine folded. Within 6 months, Julian sent one pleading email, which I deleted without reading. Serafina sent a handwritten letter of apology. It was eloquent, and I believe sincere. You were never the checkbook, Eleonora, you were the foundation. I am sorry I realized it too late. I filed it away. Her growth was her own journey, now not mine. I don't look for my name on guest lists anymore. I do not long for an invitation to a table where I am not wanted. The world now knows that in a world that often treats age as an eraser, I made myself indelible, not by raising my voice, but by calmly, quietly, and completely withdrawing the support that was never truly valued. They left my chair empty, thinking it was a sign of my absence. They were wrong. It was the throne I had paid for, and I simply decided to take it with me.